I'm so honored and happy to be with you all this morning and to have been with you all over the past year. If you've been here over the past few months, you've probably seen one of our sermon series called Good Question. Does anyone remember that? So at the beginning of this year, we asked all of us to write down questions on note cards that we wanted to hear in church. So this is something that maybe we wanted to hear a sermon about, something that maybe you haven't heard talked about in church, maybe something risky or scandalous, or something that you haven't heard practical steps or you don't know how it aligns with your faith. It could be any number of things. So I'm going to be going back to that sermon series. As you may have seen in your bulletin, today's sermon is coming from the question, how do we grieve? So this is a question that I get a lot. So this is a question that was in one of our note cards that someone wrote in. I was wondering if the person that wrote this wanted to say anything more about this or not. Okay. How do we grieve? This is a huge question, you guys, so I'm going to try to squeeze it in as concise as possible. A little bit about me. I am from Kyiv, Ukraine, some of you may know. Ukraine is a really big country. It's the biggest country fully in Europe. It's next to Poland. And for the past 10 years, it has been touched by war and devastation. And for the past 3 years, it has been touched by full-scale invasion. So that's kind of the context that I'm coming from. That's part of why I'm asked about grief a lot. The other reason is because I'm a hospital chaplain. A hospital chaplain is someone that is called when there is a death in the hospital, usually. There's also a myriad of traumatic events that we're called for. Nurses and doctors have so many people to attend to, so they need someone that has the time, energy, and resources to come in and sit with the family, or sit with a dying patient, or sit with a mother that just lost her child. So that's what I do. I often get asked, is that heavy? And the answer is yes, it is extremely heavy. And what I do with these families and these people is I laugh, and I sing, and I cry, and I sit, and I leave the room, and I'm silent, and I pray, and I let them speak. But more than all of this, I believe that I'm asked about grief a lot because I actually believe that all of us are constantly being asked about grief. I believe I'm asked about grief because I'm an alive human being in the world. I mean, listen to these phrases. No regrets. God is dead. Free Palestine. How to make friends as a 30-something-year-old. I need to call my mom. I just started crying for no reason. These phrases are just grief. They're just grief in new clothes. They're just us looking for God in our humanity. So let's start by defining our terms a little bit. According to therapist Frances Weller, there are many different kinds of sorrow and grief in our bodies, but there are two main kinds that we have. The first one is the kind of grief or sorrow that comes when we lose someone or something that we love. This tends to be a culturally accepted kind of grief. Someone died, therefore you're sad. This is the type of grief that a lot of us allow ourselves to feel. But it's not the only type of grief that we carry in our body. The second type of grief, or sorrow that we carry, is the kind that comes from a time in which we needed to be loved in a particular way, but we're not. This is the kind that a lot of us don't have so much compassion for. There is sorrow when someone you love dies. There is sorrow and grief when you move. There is grief when you are not the type of person that you want it to be. There's grief when your parent or your friend or your sibling or your partner acted in a way that is different than the kind of person you wanted them to be. The truth is, you cannot be an alive human being and not experience sorrow and grief often. If you let yourself want, you're going to feel sorrow and grief regularly. So if you don't know if this message is for you, it is, because all of us hold grief and sorrow in our body. I believe that for the big things in life, love, grief, hope, joy, we have a manual and an incredibly therapeutically sound, psychologically sound book for us. That's the Bible. I don't have one up here, but they're all in your pews. And if you don't know where to go for any situation in your life, I really suggest that you go into this book. It is scientifically backed. It is the basis of biology and psychology. There are so many amazing tools in this book. So that's where I'm going to go. How do we grieve? We go to the Bible. If you're a brown man, I really, really encourage look to the life and death of Jesus. This is a brown man who continuously challenged cultural stereotypes of how a brown man can weep and be in love with his friends. If you're not a brown man, there are so many biblical figures that you can identify with that show their grief and God's grief in tandem, and there are so many amazing tools in those stories. And then if you're a Christian, then Jesus is part of that identity, that you can look to his life and see, how do we grieve? In fact, the whole story of the Bible is the story of God's deep sorrow. I believe that God, and from what I've seen about grief and death, God is an intrinsic part of the grief journey. I'm going to go ahead and reread our psalm, Psalm 22 in our bulletin. Verse 8 comes from the suffering person's point of view. It says this: "They hurl insults, shaking their head. She trusts in the Lord," they said. "Let the Lord rescue her. Let God deliver her, since she delights in him. And yet, you brought me out of my mother's womb. You made me trust in you. From birth, I was cast on you. From my mother's womb, you have been my God. Don't be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help." Here's another way to read that. "Dear God, the things that I am a part of hate me, and they don't want to see me free. They want me trapped in my mind. But you delivered me at birth, and you will continue to deliver me through death. Since I was born, you have provided me milk. I have been dependent on you my entire life. I am all alone with my grief. Please be with me, because I can't bear it alone." How then are we to grieve? As we discussed, grief is the death of something you wanted, a dream, a desire, a reality. The way that we grieve the death of something is very, very similar to the way that we welcome the life of something, which is with a midwife. A midwife is one of the oldest professions in the world. This is typically a woman who would be with someone that was giving birth. And in ancient days, this was a very, very dangerous practice. So giving birth, there were not so many medical advancements. Giving birth would put the mother and the child's life at risk, or both. And the midwife would be there, committed to be present with the family and with the mother and with the child, whatever should happen. So that means that if the baby should die, if the mother should die, or if it should be a joyous occasion, the midwife would be there. And the midwife stands in the place between life and death. This psalm, Psalm 22, is by far not the only psalm or passage in the Bible that explains God as a midwife. There are so many passages that explain to God to be a wailing mother, a wailing woman, a grieving woman. When you look at these stories and these pictures of God's grief, you see outlined the steps to our grief. So that's why I'm starting with this. How do we grieve with a midwife? Number one, curiosity. When you feel low, go lower. When we're constantly going emotionally high, when we're constantly trying to ascend and grind and be better, sometimes what we're telling ourselves is what is low in us is not okay. When we're rejecting what is low in us, then those low feelings become a problem. But I'm telling you that grief and sorrow are not a problem to be solved. Grief and sorrow are something to be welcomed, even if that welcoming is extremely painful. A midwife can't do her job if the one that's pregnant refuses to admit that they're pregnant. Even if you're pregnant with grief, you can't hate yourself out of that. You can't hate yourself into feeling better. You can't hate yourself out of a pregnancy. There is no medical procedure in the world that can take away our grief, or it would have been invented by now. The first step to grief is welcoming it, and the next you must be curious towards it. Now, I will never say that your grief needed to happen, that it is good, that God wanted it. I will never say that. There are senselessly painful things that happen in the world, and that doesn't mean that that stuff should happen. Being curious doesn't mean taking a toxically positive attitude towards something. It means looking at yourself in the mirror, seeing your face for all that it is, and not turning away. Some theologians call this listening for the sound of your own voice. Curiosity towards your grief. This listening will take you to a darker place, probably. It'll probably take you to a dark womb. W-O-M-B, womb. Many of us had to deal with something so painful alone. We had to make sense of life as a hurt and lonely 7-year-old, 14-year-old, 25-year-old, 60-year-old. Your body may be telling you that to sit in the pain and grief of your isolation is to die. But I'm telling you that to sit in the pain and grief of your isolation is to be born. Curiosity and welcoming towards all of the amount of the grief in you allows for your grief to become a dark womb instead of a grave. Number 1, curiosity. Number 2 is community. This is a big word that we hear a lot. If you're like me, I believe in a triune God. That means that my God exists in a we and not in an I. I believe I am made in the image of this God, so God made me to reflect God, which means I exist in a we and not in an I. And this is biology, this is basic survival. Listen to this quote by therapist Frances Weller. Imagine the feeling of relief that would flood our whole being if we knew that when we are in the grip of sorrow, our village would respond to our need. We were made to be taught and comforted and mentored and seen and held and witnessed. For many of us, our greatest sorrow is that we were left alone in our grief. We didn't have an empathetic witness during our time of pain. See, when something bad happens to you, you need someone to contain your grief. You cannot hold it in your body, and you need another person to hold it and see it for you. It doesn't matter if this something bad happened 20 years ago or last night. If you have not had the attunement and the containment of community around you, then this something bad will continue to be recycled in your body. When you're opening yourself up to God, you are allowing God to pull you from your shame and from your grief and put you in the hands of community to hold you. The more that you know about God, the more you cannot know about God alone. Like a midwife, God doesn't allow us to stay. We have to be birthed, we have to come out into the light. And that means coming into community. This community finding is definitely not without pain. It's not without feeling suffocated. Sometimes it feels like being hit on the back. But it's the way to breathe in the world. God is exempling to us throughout the whole Bible that God's grief must be witnessed. It demands to be witnessed. What I'm not saying is dump all of your grief and sorrow and shame on everyone all of the time. What I am saying is be curious to your grief. Take it seriously. Listen for the sound of your own voice, and then find siblings, elders, and cousins who will witness it for you. If you can't have hope in your isolation, if you feel too isolated and that is too scary and too unsafe, find someone who will have hope for you. If you don't have faith in your grief, you have no idea how this is going to transform, find someone who will have faith for you. And if you have grief, find community. Does anyone remember the 2 points that I just said? What was the first one? Curiosity? Thank you. Gold star. This is my 3rd point. This is the last one. This is a really big one that I could spend hours talking about. Ceremony. We need rituals and ceremony to embody our pain and to release it. At the heart of midwifery is the body. God doesn't pull us from our mother without touching both us and our mom and fluids and messiness. The very nature of pulling suggests movement and meaning. If our grief is only cognitive, if it's only logical and rational, if it only makes sense to us, and if it only exists in our mind and not in our body, it will continue to reappear in bodily format until we pay attention to it. It will continue to reappear in back pain, in sex drive, in digestion issues, in chronic illness, in insomnia. Your body is begging you to let your grief flow through it. And the way that this is done is through ceremony. If you look at the story of the Bible, you see the story of midwives. All Abrahamic religions started because of midwives. If you look at the 2nd book of the Bible, Exodus, we see a story of the ancient Egyptian empire. This is a true story. Ancient Egypt was a huge empire, and they enslaved thousands and thousands of Hebrew people. These Hebrew people kept reproducing, and they reproduced so much that the Pharaoh at the time, Pharaoh was the name for the emperor, it's just a generic name. The Pharaoh at the time called the Hebrew midwives and he said, you guys are in charge of the births, make sure they stop happening. We're going to kill off all of the babies because I'm tired of these slaves reproducing and being such a bigger and bigger nation. This whole time in this whole story, we have no idea what the name of this Pharaoh is. They were just called Pharaoh, and this was just some tyrant. But who we do know the name of is the Hebrew midwives. Their names were Sifra and Pua. These were the women that creatively hid births from Pharaoh and let the Hebrew nation live. At the same time, someone called Moses was born. This was a Hebrew boy that was born into slavery that was not supposed to be born. A midwife named Pua disobeyed the king at the time, the emperor, the tyrant, and allowed this Hebrew boy to be born. His mother, named Jochebed, became creative and wove a basket and decided to put Moses in the river to see if he could survive that way. A sister named Miriam became brave and bore witness to his survival until he survived. A daughter named Bittia became kind while she was bathing in the river and decided to raise Moses up under Pharaoh's nose and save his life. All of these women were attuned to their grief, and that is how they were able to save a nation. Because Moses finally led the Hebrew people out of slavery. But that wouldn't have happened if many of these women were not attuned to their grief. Again, all of this without knowing the name of this tyrant slave master Pharaoh. God is concerned with these women and with their grief. Because the slave masters and the tyrants of the world will constantly be trying to take our bodies, but God knows that grief allows us to stay in them. Because of the grief and sorrow of these women, they were able to act in creativity, in community, in bravery, in disobedience, in empathy, and they freed a nation. What ways, what ceremonies do you need to perform to free your body and to free your people? You may need to push and cry and scream. You may need to weave a basket with your hands. You may need to walk or run along the river, paying attention to all that you've lost. You may need to bathe in the river and be naked underwater. You may need to feel cold water running over your limbs and feel the pressure that is on you. Through ceremony, we invite our body into meaningful movement. Through ceremony, we connect the Trinity of our heart, our body, and our mind. We also connect the Trinity of us, others, and God. What ceremonies in your life help you embrace mystery? What ceremonies in your life give you access to forbidden feelings? What ceremonies in your life give you access to your tears, or your grief, your hands, or your feet, or your body? If you don't know where to start, there's so many places to start. Let's start in the Bible. What were they doing? What were they doing to help themselves with the tyrant that was trying to kill them? They were performing ceremonies. So how then are we to grieve? You look to God as your divine midwife. You listen to the sound of your own voice and stay curious towards it. You find community to witness your grief. And then you create, compile, and find ceremonies to embody your suffering. One last thing is we don't grieve because it's our identity. I don't grieve because I'm Anna Maria and I'm a victim and I'm someone who grieves. I grieve because I'm Anna Maria and Anna Maria is a human and grieving is a part of the human package. To be human is to grieve. And if we're rejecting our grief, we're rejecting our humanity. And if we're rejecting our humanity, then we're trying to be God. But there's only one God. So let's stay human.